This is such a good idea. I'm going to steal it and tweet it, and by the time this comes out, people will already have liked my tweet before they'll know that I totally stole your idea.
Yo, hey everybody, welcome to episode 23 of the PoddyC. Now you may notice, depending on how Fronk is edited, that it's just me that you can see right now. And that's because there's a little bit of an incident during recording this podcast this time around that we fixed eventually. So if you're interested in skipping ahead to where there's all three of us, feel free to do so. There will be probably a chapter that tells you down at the bottom where exactly that is. But I want to take some responsibility here. This was my fault mostly, but also Fronk's fault quite a bit. And really, he has fewer jobs than me. I guess he kind of has more jobs than me, so maybe it is kind of more my fault. Either way, not a blame game we're playing here. What happened was, I was supposed to hit start recording when we start talking. In theory, Fronk should also probably be recording for a backup, something that we'll probably be doing in future weeks. But anyways, however you slice it, neither of those two things happened at the start of the episode that we recorded this week. So for about 40 minutes or so, I don't want to make you feel like you've lost a lot of content, but there was a reasonable amount of discussion that happened within this period of time where before I hit start recording, when I looked over and I realized, oh, that button's usually lit up and it's not. Oh, that's not good. So anyways, what we're gonna do is we'll splice in that part where I hit start recording, and then you're gonna come in the middle of us talking about dungeons. But I'm gonna do my best to remember all the discussion that we had before I hit start recording, and provide that for you now, so that you can get some of that value. Now it'll be a little bit abridged, and my Dorki voice is probably better than my Max voice, but neither of them is particularly accurate, I don't think. So you're gonna have to kind of suffer through that if you want, or again, chapter at the bottom, go straight to the bit where there's all three of us. And next week I'll try and remember to hit start recording. I don't know, no promises. But okay, so we started off and we're like, yeah, this is Dorki's like, yo guys, what's everybody been up to? I've been playing my keys, pushing my keys, bolstering keys. And we had a little bit of a discussion about that. One of the discussions we had was around keys, and actually about how one of the biggest features of season 4 is that with the key level squish, you can do +9 keys and not have bolstering on it and still be getting pretty much the full benefit of +10 keys. And a lot of people out there, you can be doing +5 keys or whatever, +3 keys. You can only be playing with one affix if you want, and you're doing keys that previously would have had all three on them, right? Like if you're doing a +4 key, I think that is only one affix key right now, and that used to be a 3 affix key at +14 last season, which really makes you think Max had some thing of like, my Max impression. I don't have a Max impression. My Dorki impression's easy. You just lower the register by like 5 or 6 tones, but I don't know how to do a Max impression at all. But he was like, yeah, that's, it was wild that is true, and there's something that he and I agreed on, so that they really should look at that and be like, oh, maybe we should change how our game works a little bit. If it is a huge advantage that you take out those affixes and the game gets a lot better. And when you give people the option to do that, I suspect are doing it in droves. I don't actually know if this is true, but I suspect, if you look at the amount of people doing 9s versus doing 10s, that is a big gap. Another thing we talked about was the new hero talents. There's Coin Flip Rogue, Fate-Bound Rogue, where you basically just flip a coin every time you do a finisher, and that, determines whether you either are doing a little bit more damage or it just does a proc of damage. And if you flip the same coin a bunch of times in a row, you get a bunch of benefits. And if you can flip 7 times in a row the same coin, which sounds very unlikely, right? Then you get a huge benefit. And it's something we talked about a little bit of like, is this something that's going to be fun to do? Because you have a couple of buttons you can press that'll like guarantee a couple of flips. So if you're at, say, a streak of 3 or 4 flips in a row, you cold get yourself to that 7 flip threshold by using your cooldowns. And if you're an outlaw rogue, that means like Adrenaline Rush, Banish, Cold Blood. You can use, I think, to take you from 3 to 7 on your streak. But if you're an assassination rogue, are we really going to be holding our death mark? Waiting for a streak of coin flips before pressing our death mark? That sounds like something where it's probably like really not fun playstyle wise. So Max had a good point that was like, we really got to wait and see how these actually play. These things they're not fully implemented yet. And Resto Shamans in particular, they were complaining about Farseer all up until they could actually play with it, at which point they were like, oh yeah, okay, this is sick. I've actually played a little bit of Resto Shaman, and I agree, it's pretty sick, the Farseer thing, so that's something that I think he has a good point there, that, the Fatebound may look, especially for Assassination, is kind of both flavorfully maybe a little bit weird, but also like gameplay potentially dangerous and not particularly fun, but definitely still worth trying it before. On the other hand, Archon, which is the Shadow Priest one, Shadow and Holy Priest one, that one I think Max and I both agree is pretty sick. Dorki was sitting there kind of quiet, doing his thing where he's VTubing or whatever. He's not even VTubing, right? He's just a cat, picture. So he can just get up and walk away if we're talking about something he doesn't care about. And I suspect this might have been one of those things. He was just not really talking for like 5 minutes while we were talking about Archon. But Archon is sick. It's a really cool Shadow and Holy Priest thing where it's built around Halo and it makes your cooldowns giga. If you're playing Shadow Priest, like your Void Form, your Dark Ascension are getting huge buffs. You're getting duration extensions on them. Your Halo is also adding damage done and damage taken increased enemies. So your cooldowns are like 30% stronger or something like that. Like in terms of when you factor in the duration and potency increase on those cooldowns, it's maybe more than 30% stronger in your cooldowns or on your cooldowns as compared to if you were not using a hero talent, for instance, which is very sick, especially when their other option is Void Weaver, which is a much more consistent damage pattern around their Void Torrent and stuff. So it's a very cool option. And Max's point was like, if you're playing, there's a couple of specs in the game, like Rep Pally, that are just getting 2 sick hero talent trees, and surprising all the mage specs, because all 3 mage hero talent trees are insane, so every mage spec has 2 great options. And Shadow Priest is another one where he's like, yeah, this is a spec where you have 2 hero talent trees, and they're both sick. And I think especially for raid encounters, he was like, look, you can go into any raid fight, and if you want consistent damage, you play Void Weaver. If you want your cooldowns to blast, you play Archon, and they're filling 2 different roles, but doing both of them in really cool ways. It should be pretty cool. We also had a bit of a discussion around, there's this Wowhead post that was of this interview. There were actually 2 interviews between devs and NDA'd people, and all 3 of us were invited to these. I only was awake for one of them. I don't know which ones Max and Dorki went to, but we could record it for our own use. We couldn't publish anything that was recorded in it, but you could talk about it, right? You just couldn't actually upload the recordings. And WoW had recently released like a summary, basically transcribing and editing, for clarity mostly, and brevity, the responses that the devs gave to a bunch of questions. And one of them was around tier sets. And Fronk will, if he's not too sick of me by now, by the way, Fronk, I think I also screwed up the audio balance in this file a little bit, so you're going to have to probably make me louder and the whole thing. I'm sorry about that. My audio's been just a little bricked. I need to go through and figure out what I've done to make myself quieter, but anyways, Fronk's got a busy night ahead of him is what I'm trying to get to here. But anyways, if he's done doing that and is ready for another task is to put up the exact answer that Blizzard had on the tier sets interacting with hero talent trees. And basically, if you read it at face value, it's saying that this first season of War Within, instead of there being a set bonus for each spec, there's going to be a set bonus for each hero talent instead, which, there's the same number of hero talent trees as there are specs. Max was saying, which is true, that means it's not necessarily that much more work for them. Something they could do, but it would be a very different kind of way of doing things. Now, me and Dorki both were like, we think this is so weird and unlikely to be something they're doing that even though there's this post from Wowhead that's saying it's what they're doing, I think that it was either mistyped or mistranscribed or misspoken, and that's not actually what they're trying to do. Some of my argument is if you look at like the second and third sentence in that answer, they kind of don't make that much sense unless there's a missing not before the making one for each hero talent tree in the first sentence. So I kind of think there like should be one there. Like I think that I personally would bet on that actually being the most likely, but either way we had a discussion about if they were doing that. And one thing that Dorki and I also thought was like, oh man, if they do this for hero talent trees, it's going to be really tough for the ones that are hybridized between multiple roles, right? Like if you have a tank set bonus and a DPS set bonus, like how do you make a set bonus that's the same for the two of them without just radically diverging. And Max came in with this point. I'm just reminding you that this was a conversation had by all three of us, by the way. And that, again, sorry about robbing you from the actual conversation and just badly summarizing it. But he came in and had this point that, like, you know, if you look at tank set bonuses are insane compared to DPS set bonuses pretty often. Like, you can find tank set bonuses in a lot of tiers that are just tremendous, massive survivability increases. And whereas DPS set bonuses are often like, oh, you know, 10% damage kind of across the board, something like that, depending on what their tuning target is in a given tier. But tank ones can often be like, oh, in M+ situations, like, you maybe have like 30% more tankiness if you wanted to kind of try and quantify it, which is obviously a very difficult thing to do, but is potentially something that I think is a fair way to describe some of the tank set bonuses we've seen over history. I mean, if you think about Blood DK Season 4 Shadowlands set bonus, that thing is like maybe 150% more tankiness in an M+ situation as compared to not having the set bonus on. Maybe less. Maybe that's a bad approximation, but how do you make that a hero talent set bonus, right? How do you make a hero talent set bonus then for one of the ones that's shared between tanks and DPS without just like making it maybe a throughput increase, a damage increase? How do you make it for the ones that are shared between healers and DPS? I mean, you could, right, for Archon, you could just make it, oh, Holy Nova deals 20% increased damage and healing, right? Like, you could, or not Holy Nova, Halo rather. You could do something like that, I guess, but Dorki's point was like, if you do that, if you do that, aren't you just kind of making all them more boring set bonuses, right? And, you know, you're trying to make something cool with the hero talent set bonuses, but really they're all just getting more boring, And that's I think his point is, and a good one. Then we talked for a little while about the launch of Season 4. The launch of Season 4 was quite buggy, and Max has only really interacted with this in the sense of he raid-led, you know, World First Awakened Razageth and World First Awakened Sarkarath. But other than that, he hasn't touched really Season 4. So me and Dorki got to tell him about a bunch of different bugs that have existed in Season 4. We've got these bugs with item level, a lot of different item level bugs, time walking gear bugs, upgrading legendary. Your legendary couldn't be upgraded for like more than a day after the second bullion was obtained. And then when it was first upgradable, it cost more than it should have if you were supposed to have discounts available for it. Then there was also Hero Track 5 out of 6 and 6 out of 6 upgrades costing Worm's Crest instead of Aspect's Crest like they now do and like they were supposed to. Something that I did exploit a little bit. But, you know, surely they're not going to take action against anybody who exploited that kind of thing in Season 4. But those are just some of the bugs that have come with Season 4. And it's been a pretty messy start for a season. I mean, even compared to a regular season where there's a bunch of new content that often comes with bugs, here, you know, there's not actually like new content, and there's just been an absurd amount of bugs, relatively speaking. Now, Max's point was like, okay, look, they've been doing Plunder, they've been doing Mop Remix, they've been doing all this other stuff. Season 4 is kind of a back burner project. There's something maybe you would expect from them. Like maybe that's the trade-off, right? Like if you're getting more content, is it going to be buggier on the release? My point as well was like, okay, yeah, especially if Season 4 is a lower prio, right? Like it makes sense from our perspective. Obviously it feels bad, particularly for me this week, doing my Mythic raid with a 502 Fearolath when I know it should be 535 and I can't upgrade it. And, you know, by the time raid is done and they fix it, or not raiding again for the rest of the week and like that, you know, that does feel pretty bad in the moment, right? But is that actually that bad in the scheme of things, right? Like if we zoomed out and we were deciding where to allocate our resources, would we allocate resources from other seasons into Season 4? Maybe not, right? Like maybe this actually does make sense, but realistically, of course, the answer all of us would like was we would like there to just be more total resources applied such that Season 4 got enough to not be such a buggy mess on release. And yeah, I mean, it's concurrent with a Cataclysm Classic thing that none of the three of us really know much about, but Cataclysm Classic has also been having a tremendous amount of bugs apparently for the like launch of the pre-patch and everything there. So it's not just localized to retail Season 4, but it seems like kind of across the board there's a bug, you know, epidemic right now. And, you know, if that's just a kind of one-off thing, I think all of us would be totally fine with that. Not too worried, but I guess we're all just really hoping it's not the new normal, and something that, especially something that wouldn't happen in a normal season. Now, there was also discussion of set bonus problems in Season 4. Season 4 has come with a few set bonus issues. Issues with Moonkins, Blood Decays, and Serve Hunters in particular, who in some or all cases are keeping their old set bonuses over upgrading to full 4-piece. Plus, there's the issue of if your spec voted for the same set bonus as Season 3, it's weird, and you can't break 4-piece really until you get new 4-piece if your set bonus is good, because if you try and put on 2-piece, it doesn't work, right? You're just getting 2-piece. You're not getting 2-piece. So you can only do that in some rare cases where the eye level is worth a lot, but that means the set bonus is usually quite weak. But Blizzard, when they did their vote, they said, hey, we're going to fix these so that whichever one you vote for, they're all going to be the same power level. So don't worry about that. Just vote for the ones you like. And then during the vote, there were a lot of people that were like, you idiots, just vote for the strongest one. And then there were other people that were like, no. They told us, they promised us that they're going to make it so that these are all equally balanced, right? And then if you're a Moonkin player and you're now supposed to not put on your new 4-piece, you got to be feeling pretty disillusioned with Blizzard right now. If you were one of those people that was arguing like, no, let's vote for the set bonus we enjoyed the gameplay of the most rather than the one that like sims the most, which is weird because, obviously like almost a lot of set bonuses did get updated, right? They did get changes to buff the ones that were returning. The Moonkin one did get buffed when it came back, just not to the point of it being worth equipping over the old set bonus, right? Whereas the Dev Evoker one, the Dev Evoker Aberrus set bonus that won the vote got like a 50% buff to its 2-piece, and Dev Evokers love it. They're equipping it. They're putting it on at pretty much any eye level. As soon as you can get new 2-piece, you break old 4-piece, you put on 2-piece, you're chilling. So that is, I think, something that in particular, I've got a video that's out, I guess, probably at the time that you can see this, where I'm mostly just complaining about that. But that's something that I personally feel quite strongly is a urgent Season 4 prio that they've got to fix. Beyond that, we didn't really talk about it during the episode, but the other stuff is just should they do tuning to Vengeance Demon Hunter, that kind of stuff. Should they do M+ tuning more? But yeah, then we kind of transitioned into talking about dungeon stuff. I'm going to be honest, this was about the point that I hit start recording. I don't remember the few sentences before I hit start recording, but we're going to go into that probably now. Fronk, I don't know how he's going to edit this. Maybe he's going to decide, like, I can't just put Dratnos talking by himself for 10 minutes at the start of this, or however long he's been talking for now at the start of my podcast. Like, I gotta put this at the end instead. So maybe the sequencing of this is going to be all wrong. Maybe we're going to have started the podcast with the in the middle of that discussion, and then at the end we're going to put me explaining all the stuff that didn't happen. Or maybe you're never going to see this, because maybe Frank's going to look at this and he's going to be like, Dratnos, you moron. We're not going to release this. We're going to get back together tomorrow and re-record everything. I don't know. Fair play. Maybe he does that. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen here. All I can say is it's probably not going to happen again. I'm probably going to really triple check to make sure I hit start recording in the future. But either way, maybe now we're going to transition into the main part of the show with all three of us. Thank you for bearing with me, everybody. I'm sorry I forgot to hit start recording. My bad.
It feels like they have a lot they can do in their hands. But on the other hand, the opposite is entirely true too, because you have to look at it from a civilian perspective. Like for most civilian healers who are just out here pugging, we are not only having to deal with the crazy amount of burst damage, but also the mistakes people are making. Now, like obviously in a perfect world where you have a Demon Hunter locking down all the mobs and people are properly using the defensives, it's like, all right, I know exactly when I need to be healing these burst damage windows. But when you have that type of damage that you're supposed to heal, and people are standing in shit, and casts are going off, that's the worst. And I've actually been healing a little bit this season too, and I personally have been kind of enjoying it. I know Growl kind of enjoys it too, but it's definitely too much for a lot of civilian healers.
We should do an entire episode on that. I don't want to go too much into it, because I also think there's so much nuance with like the key level you're doing it at, right? like if you're trying, again, their target audience for Mythic Plus is doing 20s. It gives you the portals. That's where 95% of people or more stop playing. Why does my dog keep going on top of the couch? He's been doing this for like 5 minutes. Okay, he's just posting up there. But
He's having a good time.
yeah, he is having a good time. But like, if you do the infinite scaling Mythic Plus thing, by having a ton of healer mechanics like that on bosses and trash, you also limit the healer meta at the very, very, very highest level, because there are just only so many healers that could actually heal that damage profile when it's infinite scaled up a million times, right? Where on a 20, 21, 22, 23, it doesn't matter, and it just feels like it's fun to heal. So it just depends on who you're going to talk to. Like, if we're going to get healer opinions, right? Like, I bet people at the top who have like had a class they love to play, but it's just very simply like just like defensives in this game, right? You're a Havoc Demon Hunter. You can live, you're super tanky, but then you get to a certain key level and you can't live the boss screaming at you every 10 seconds like a rogue with full verse stack and feint can, and now your defensives aren't good enough, you know? It could be the exact same thing with a healer. So like, yeah, we'll probably table that, but we could probably get the other cat on and a couple other people. I bet there's a lot of good takes there.
Yeah, I mean, so I was gonna say, like, real quick, the crazy part about it for lower keys too is that, like, sometimes it's actually true that the lower keys are harder to heal than the higher keys.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like it's really hard to fix that problem. Like, how do you exactly go about that problem where you?
It's because the people in your group
some-
don't are it's less in a high key. People can't get hit by that thing on the ground because it will one shot them, so they are forced to not do it. But in like a 20,
Right.
like you can get hit by the thing and won't exactly die. So it's like your healing at that level is very chaotic because of the people you're playing with.
Yeah, and you're expecting that type of damage. Like that type of damage is just something that's included in the package of the dungeon, whereas it normally wouldn't be a thing in a hierarchy.
And defensive use as well. Like as defensives have become a larger and larger part of the game, like their use has been something you can rely on in a good group, right? But it's not something you can rely on at all in many groups, right? So I think, you know, a lot of these sorts of dungeons will see healers really, like people like Growl who love being challenged by the content, especially in like predictable but high throughput ways, and often play with people who are capable of pressing defensives. They, I think, tended to like dungeons like Sanguine Depths and stuff that really offered that profile a lot. But, you know, a Pug healer, yeah, if you were either not that good or played with people that weren't that good, well, healing check dungeons are often a nightmare, right? Like Court of Stars, before that last boss got nerfed, would just brick wall you. And one of the other things as well is, like, if you got a bad healing check, you're not going to win, right? Like you're not going to eventually win. It's not like you can, you know, muddle through, really, right? Like you're just toast. Especially if it's one of the later bosses, your time is just wasted. It feels really bad. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but I will say from my perspective, I've been having a lot of fun with the dungeons, especially the season 1 dungeons. Like, dude, doing Algathar Academy but not having thundering in my life has been really good. I love that. That's been sweet. So I think that especially the season 1 dungeons, now that we're playing them without thundering, that's been really fun.
Well, that's another thing. Yeah. So you're just saying, like, your opinion of the season 1 Dragonflight dungeons has changed or noticeably changed because thundering just doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's just better, right? Like we're just doing these dungeons without thundering, and then the season 2 dungeons, you know, also are largely pretty good. I think Uldaman of the 8 dungeons we have this season is the one that when that one shows up in my list of keys that I've got, I'm, you know, not super thrilled about it. I don't know how you're feeling, Dorki. What key is like the bomb that you can roll into, like King's Rest used to be?
I actually kind of like Uldaman, but I know a lot of people don't like it. I'm like, I have that rare opinion that, like, you know, that dungeon is extremely high intensity the entire time. Like you're constantly fighting for your life, and you're constantly doing big pulls.
You like that?
There's just shit happening the entire time. Yeah, and I like that. But I know for a lot of players, I've seen a lot of complaints like, oh man, like fucking Uldaman, like, I can't believe we have it back. And it's like, so it's brutal. For me, I don't like no good, especially with the changes they've made to that dungeon, specifically in like the third boss area. Those mobs are not it, man. They made the beast callers impossible to pull, and the birds are extremely obnoxious. If the rotting wind cast goes off, it's like high chance of wiping. But that's my least favorite.
That mob had its ability changed as well, right? That was
Yeah.
that's something that changed.
It was just the frontal.
Yeah, it used to be frontal, and now it just hits the whole group, right? Regardless.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've done a couple of those changes actually. There's a few mobs that have had their whole thing changed.
Well,
Yeah, it's interesting. They actually like, so it seems like their solution to too many casts is to just make stuff not kickable, and so
Yeah.
it's just something you have to deal with.
I think that's really interesting of a design concept though, because like part of the issue in the game right now, without massive pruning, is the amount of stops and micro CCs that are available. But if you think about why those are important, it's because there are so many things that are stoppable. So like if you're Blizzard, I can definitely see a line of thinking where it's easier for you to tune a dungeon for everyone's experience if you tune that thing definitely going off, not getting stopped, and then you tune it to be dealt with because you want it to be dealt with and it's just something that the trash does. And in a way, yeah, you're making trash do more, but you're also making stops less and less relevant as just a thing in this game. And I think there's an argument as to that being good for sure, but like I'm not sure if that is worth it at the cost of every pack has something else going on. You know, like there's a reason people do stops.
Yeah.
It's because these packs without stops is fucking demonic. So like, but the thing is you'd have to tune it knowing that. If you tune it so it can't get stopped, it clearly can't be as oppressive. So
This kind of ties into the whole healer thing actually, because you know how like we're talking about how in a good group you can stop all these things, but then like in the bad group they don't stop all those things, so the healer just has to suffer. But now the healer has to suffer regardless.
which we love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the Rotting Wind case, though. So, okay, the Rotting Winds you can stop, but
That one gets that, but yeah, but
the
just,
Beast
like,
Callers were
the
changed
Beast
in
Callers,
the
yeah.
Interior and Maruk area. So, Max, these are mobs that they used to sit around and summon ads, but you could like stop them. Now you can't. So, if you pull one, they're just going to summon a bunch of dogs over and over again. Makes them honestly, it makes that pack just kind of unpullable. But I think if we look at the War Within dungeons we've done, there's a few packs. Like there was the Dawnbreaker dungeon we did, which was this airship dungeon. It was pretty cool. But it had these pulls where it's like, if you pull twice as many mobs, you're going to have this debuff that goes on people that you're not going to be able to dispel anywhere close to the... Like, if you just pull one pack, you know, everybody's getting one stack every 8 seconds or 15 seconds or whatever, you can keep it under control. But if you pull 2 packs, you're getting 2 stacks every so often, right? And, like, just the entire... Everybody's dead. And that, I think, is the kind of... Like, if you do, like, unstoppable stuff like that, I think that's kind of the idea of it, right? Is that the difficulty goes up like exponentially as you're pulling more mobs rather than just linearly.
But it removes the need
yeah.
for communication of stops in like a not too high of a key level. Like this is maybe this is extremely cooked. I thought of this earlier. I'm just gonna say it again here on the podcast, but like the idea that like just maybe one season they make a dungeon that nothing can be stopped. Not a single mob can be stunned. If we're going really extreme here, maybe even kicked, but like every single thing that happens to you in that dungeon is intended to be dealt with, and it is tuned because of that. And that's so different from WoW. It makes no use of like hundreds of buttons in this game, and so it's probably not the overall goal, but it would be an interesting design experiment to see how that plays out and what dungeons would look like if, and have Blizzard realize what these dungeons need to look like if people aren't stopping all this stuff. Because if you really boil it down right now, they're making it, it's almost like the weak aura problem in raids, right? They're making things weak, they're making mechanics because weak auras exist and they have to design around that. They know you have a million stops, so they have to give you a million things to stop, which makes it annoying for top groups, but doable. But we always talk about what is the difference between like a super, super good group and someone who's is not as invested in the game. The first thing that you notice is not damage or healing. It is the ability to coordinate and consistently use crowd control and assignments just in general. So you're actually making the game more oppressive for the lower playing base by creating dungeons with that concept. And I just wonder what that looks like, or if they would learn anything from doing something like that.
Yeah, I think that actually hits the nail on the head 100% for a lot of the players who are just out there on the streets.
Yeah.
Especially the civilian healers, man. Goddamn, those guys are having a rough one.
Yeah.
Do we want to talk a little bit about the 2 alpha dungeons that came out this week that we tested? Or has a...
I have some thoughts, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so we have the Dawnbreaker, which was the one, that one was like quite overtuned, it felt like, but that's like a common alpha thing, right? Just randomly something.
I don't think that's relevant at all.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't read too much into that, but it had large amounts of like dragon riding stuff in it.
It is the no-cut offensive of the next expansion. They clearly made one dungeon with dragon riding as the thing, which, by the way, a lot of people I know for a fact are in they're already writing in the comments. They're like, I hated no-cut offensive. The reason that no-cut offensive was bad, in my opinion, had nothing to do with dragon riding. It had to do with a lot of other things. But what you guys were fan, I think that one actually seemed really cool.
Yeah, so basically, like, you start off by fighting your way onto the ship, and then those mobs seem pretty good. They kind of just didn't seem to do too much. The first boss, kind of chill as well, right? Like, also, you just kind of killed it, and there was some healing absorb stuff and a dispel that you, like, dispel, and you need to heal everybody through healing absorb really fast on Mythic is how that's going to work. Then you're, like, going to these other ships, dragon riding over to them, killing trash packs on a couple other ships. And then you get this really interesting middle bit of the dungeon where there's, like, a town full of bad guys, and it has 3 mini-bosses spread out within it, and a boss that's patrolling between them. And you kind of have to go down, you dragon ride down there, you can kind of plan out how you want to attack the town, but it's full of mobs, it's super dense, it's really hard to avoid pulling extra stuff if you're trying to just surgically only pull the mini-bosses. And you gotta basically go and get all of them, maybe? Each mini-boss that's alive empowers an ability on the boss, and makes it like quite a lot harder. Like we're talking about a 15-yard AoE fear turning into an 100-yard AoE fear, that type thing for on the boss.
Yeah, you basically have to kill all the mini bosses.
Well, do you know? Because
I don't agree with that at all.
Also gives the boss 30% increased damage done and 50% increased health. So it's like those numbers aren't the like screw you. You're supposed to kill all the mini bosses numbers. That number is like
Weren't they mechanic specific too? Like
yeah.
Like
each one gives a health and damage buff and also empowers a mechanic.
Exactly. So like if you're looking at a health and damage buff, depending on their I mean, I don't know. In my opinion, if it's the Court of Stars thing where there's an illusion of choice, like you have the ability to like pull the boss and deal with some extra stuff, I like that. I don't like, oh, you could do this, but it's like extremely hard and like you'll never actually do it. Then it's like, what are we even doing here, kind of thing. And we noticed this in the other dungeon too. This is actually what I wanted to bring up today. Is that one thing with dungeon design in this expansion is number one, the dungeons seem shorter and with less bosses, 100%. Like that is true across the board in this expansion, and I think the community is gonna like that. Like that is something that people have kind of been asking for a while. There was a poll on Twitter the other day. It was like, what's your ideal dungeon length? And like, I think 20 to 25 minutes was the...
Oh, that part is so true, yeah.
Was the winner, right? So like, that's something that people want. But also, one thing that one of the best seasonal affixes Awakened got right is they gave you 4 lieutenants you needed to kill throughout the dungeon. And you, depending on the dungeon, not even just the MDI, you would leave certain ones up to deal with on the last boss. And they seem to have that same kind of concept here with the 2 we tried today. Like, there are extra mini bosses. You can choose to fight the boss with them, and it is not intended to be an instant wipe scenario. I think it is supposed to be like a, you know, an actual choice. Like, do you want to kill less mini bosses? Okay, well, a boss ability will be empowered. I don't even think there needs to be health and damage added. Because like at an infinite scaling level, that's going to never work. Like, I literally think they can just empower the mechanics, make it a pretty brutal empower, make the boss harder, but give you the choice to cut some time off your key by learning how to do a much harder dungeon boss. I think that sounds insanely fun. I hope they end up going with that. There's 2 dungeons that almost pulled that off, and I hope they end up actually doing it.
I would be very surprised. Because I mean, to me, that doesn't seem like the intent. It seems more like Court of Stars, where like you kind of have to kill all the mini bosses unless you're doing some like freaky MDI strategy. Because I don't know. I mean, I feel like if you were able to do that, they would probably try to make it so that you have to kill all the mini bosses. Like,
why?
Like make some of the.
You know, like
it just feels like something they're gonna do. You know,
if you're in a pug, you can go through and kill them for like the weekly no lever Dratnos route, right? But like if you are doing it in like an organized group, you should have the ability to do that. And also, like, talk about innovation. Like, you would start the season never doing stuff like that, and someone would figure out a way to do that without the certain mini boss. And it's by like, you know, either like a certain couple of classes can do this, or like by pulling the boss in a certain spot, you can deal with this thing. Like, I don't know. I just, that kind of innovation sounds so fun.
No, yeah, I think it would be fucking amazing if they actually did that. I just don't see that being their design goal. Because I mean, they've never done something like that before. If they do something like that for once, I do think that'd be amazing.
I mean, these dungeons seem pretty different, right? Like, this is, I think, the most different they have approached dungeons from expansion on expansion since Mythic Plus has come out, as far as like the length and the bosses thing. So like, clearly they're looking at it differently. There's a lot of damage amps now. There's shields. There's actually a lot of damage amps in Dragonflight too. But like, there's a lot of shields now because there's multiple classes with like shield-based things, like do more damage to bosses with shields and stuff. So I don't know. I just think the design is pretty interesting, and I hope to see more of it. I would also say, super hard to tell. Almost no one has seen these. There's not a lot of people in alpha. We haven't seen them with them tuned very difficult. But I will say, so far, if you are judging these dungeons based off of the aesthetic, the vibe, the general gameplay, what's happening around you, I understand for some people all of that could be great, and then you do a infinite scaling 30 and one ability scales faster than another dungeon, and now this is your least favorite dungeon of all time. But like, you know, leaving that out of it, I think the dungeon, they just seem really high quality. I heard someone say when I said this before, I don't know if we talked about this on a previous podcast. I remember reading a comment somewhere. I think it was a tweet. I tweeted this, and someone was like, "That's what they said in Dragonflight." That is not true. We saw multiple dungeons in Dragonflight where they're like, Azure Vault, this stinks. Brackenhide, this stinks. Like, it was like 3 or 4 of them stink. Like, I can tell you 5 of the 6 dungeons we've seen are like great, and 2 of them are elite. They are like, it wouldn't surprise me if they, I don't know how Mythic Plus ends up shaking out, but like as memorable and good as like Freeholds of the world, right? Especially like the B dungeon. Like, I think the dungeons are awesome so far. I don't know if you guys have the same opinion.
I think in terms of vibe, like 100%, these are probably the coolest dungeons since, I want to say, Legion.
Yeah, since Legion.
I haven't really like felt this cool about dungeons since Legion.
Dawnbreaker.
But I definitely want to.
When
Dawnbreaker. Wait,
when
which
the
one was that
crystal
one?
goes all void. No, the one we were on the
That's
ship. That's
insanely cool.
The sun crystal turns into like a void crystal. Like, oh my god. Sorry. Go ahead.
And that's
I mean,
a
the second
dragon
dungeon we
riding
did
dungeon.
too. That was cool as fuck too.
Yeah, like the dragon riding dungeon though doesn't have the, well, I think it doesn't have the parts of dragon riding that made No Good bad. It doesn't feel, well, except for the part where the boss was immune at the end, and depending on the like the RP spawn location, you would just instantly die. Okay, that was like a bug though, but like how that dungeon's supposed to work, oh my god, the shadow crystal looks insane. Fronk, by the way, he will put up a picture of the dark crystal when we were in that dungeon earlier right now. With
last
actually,
boss room too. Oh, we gotta put that one too. That one's
he'll even
amazing.
do it so whatever image he uses for Dorki's camera today, it will look like that he is holding up the picture.
Yeah.
Oh, it might be sick.
It's gonna he's gonna be juggling it between his 2 cat hands and stuff, and it's gonna be good. He's gonna be on a little unicycle doing some circus tricks.
The best part is usually when we're recording these, Fronk is like not here because it's so late, but like he's actually here right now. Like, he's just listening to this. He's at his computer and just not saying, oh, just
Look at this
taking
guy.
it in. He's taking it in.
Jesus. Imagine
That is
being
good.
Fronk right now. Yeah, but I mean, so the vibes are like immaculate, but we do need to see when they actually come to M+, because that's where we'll really see the feedback from a lot of players.
Well,
that's
not even
where
just
we
Mythic
saw-
Plus, but Mythic. Like, these bosses look significantly different.
That's
on
true
Mythic,
too.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I say Mythic Plus specifically because like we don't know what type of count we're gonna require. Because like, what if it just ends
the
up
count's
being all right?
important.
You gotta do like every single mob in a dungeon, and then like you have to fight the mini bosses. You know how we were talking about. Do you actually have to fight all the mini bosses or not? I feel like we probably have to fight all the mini bosses, but we'll only see when we actually get to try them in M+.
I think you're right.
And-
I just hope you're wrong. That's all.
Yeah, no, I hope so too. Like, I hope I'm completely wrong. That'd be amazing. But it also depends on the tuning a lot too. The tuning and like, you know, the run backs, all those like super minor details. Like, if you think about it, a lot of these dungeons that were terrible in Dragonflight, where I'm thinking Azure Vault, Brackenhide, remember, and Halls of Infusion. Those dungeons people were heavily dooming on. Before Season 2 came out, everyone was talking about how Brackenhide was going to be the worst dungeon ever. And
On
then
Mythic
Blizzard
Zero,
was like,
it was
"Wait."
brutal though.
It was bad.
So bad.
There were
Yeah.
like so many mechanics, and you had to deal with like the most oppressive disease debuff, and like everything was just awful. But then like they completely changed it up, and it turned out to be one of the best Dragonflight dungeons. And the same
Can I
for
throw a counter? Can I counter your best
Yeah,
Dragonflight
yeah.
dungeon thing? It had a lot of big pulls, so people like that. But is it just being excused that half of that dungeon wasn't pullable the entire time, and in a dungeon that isn't supposed to be linear and give you choice just eliminated half of the dungeon? I feel like that's super corny. But...
Yeah, that's definitely criminal, but amongst the Dragonflight dungeons, it's still one of the better ones. Which I mean, I guess
I had fun doing it. Yeah,
half the dungeon being unpullable is also something we wouldn't know if that was true about these War Within dungeons yet, right? Like that absolutely
exactly.
Could
That's
be
why
true
it
of any
depends.
Of these dungeons.
Right.
Those are the kind of things that you like. Even in M0 week, I was going that direction in Bracken, and it was kind of fine, right? But like
that's true. Yeah,
it doesn't matter until you get into the keys. So, I mean, it doesn't alleviate that responsibility from them. But I do think if you think about the Dragonflight dungeons, a lot of them are pretty much like, here's an area, walk through it, right? And like, there's some stuff where it's like, oh, there's the jumpy wind tunnels or whatever in Algathar Academy, but mostly it's just like, hey, we created this area. In some cases, it's pretty cool and evocative. In some cases, like Old Man Azure Vault, it's like pretty bland scenery, right? And I don't think I think all the War Within dungeons is like, okay, the Rookery is maybe kind of less aesthetically exciting than some of the others, but it's not even, I would say it would be above average in terms of Dragonflight dungeons, in terms of just like how much eye candy stuff there is going on.
It feels like a Dragonflight dungeon. The Rookery feels like a Dragonflight dungeon made in this expansion, and the rest of the dungeons feel distinctly different.
Yeah.
But I do think like the tuning is what really matters, because you look at Halls of Infusion right now, actually, like Halls of Infusion has seen major glow up. It's been one of the worst dungeons.
Oh wow.
This expansion, but like right now it's actually not that bad. Like I honestly think Halls of Infusion went from the worst dungeon to like it's in the middle, I would say. Like it's really not that bad anymore. I think that's like super important when we're looking at these War Within dungeons.
Yeah, I don't think that's surprising though, because like wasn't Halls of Infusion just, there wasn't a lot wrong with it. It was just like the last boss having multiple phases was just absurd, and
run back
trash and the run back and the trash at the beginning was absolutely psychotic in comparison with other stuff. But they just fixed all that. So it turns out bad dungeons are good when you fix them, I guess is maybe the elaborate thing I'm trying to say, but it's super simple.
Yeah, I mean, even then though, I don't think Halls of Infusion, I think Halls of Infusion as like an M+ dungeon that M+ enthusiasts enjoy has gone way up from fixing those few things that it, like the huge Season 4 change to it. It's gone from being like an awful M+ dungeon to being a good M+ dungeon. But in terms of being like a dungeon that people that do each dungeon 5 to 10 times lifetime will like, I think Halls of Infusion was never good on that metric. Like it was always pretty uninspiring in that way. Like it was kind of a cool Titan complex, I guess, thing, but it was just a bunch of halls, right? Whereas the Dawnbreakers, like, we're flying on this ship, we're getting off the ship to go fight stuff, we're
crazy,
coming back to our airship.
Dude, this expansion was, man, so far since we've seen the dungeons, it's as if they made them and they were like, all right, we're not happy with this dungeon until like someone will do this dungeon and just like 5 to 10 times, like you said, people who do it as they level and then maybe at heroics at top level and then they do Mythic 0 and then they quit, whatever. Like they will remember these, that they're very memorable. They're so much more. I mean, just the quality level of like what goes into each dungeon and what the mobs are casting and the names of what they are and what it looks like is just on a different level than Dragonflight, at least. I don't really remember with BFA. I have like rose tinted glasses from Season 4 Mythic Plus of that expansion, but like at least Legion kind of felt like that, but also that's a long time ago. So maybe we'd go back to it now and you don't feel that way. I don't know.
Yeah,
love it.
Absolutely. I don't know. I think they're really cool. The one that's like least interesting layout wise is the coolest like names and stuff as well, like the bees and stuff, the BEO. You just fill a boring room with a bunch of exciting mobs and it's a fun dungeon as well. Like it's that one's going to be iconic too. So yeah, those dungeons are looking really good. I don't know. I think it's exciting. I do think that the Season 4 thing though, where they like went back and fixed all the Dragonflight dungeons, basically, like not all of them, but Theris Chains, Halls of Infusion, last boss. They actually nerfed a bunch of that left side trash in Brackenhide, although they haven't done enough to make that path compelling, but they took another swing at it at least. They've done like a huge pass of like, hey, these changes are going to make M+ a lot better in these dungeons. I hope they are planning to do that the first season that we have these War Within dungeons rather than the second, because it's
or
so
mid-season.
much...
Yeah,
mid-season's
yeah.
great.
Like think about how much people would have felt differently about season 2 if like Halls of Infusion was as good as it was now. Like I don't know how long it took them to fix Halls of Infusion, but if you would have just the value you would have gotten at just doing it earlier would have been insane.
Yeah, that's actually something to say too. Like, how much can they do mid-season? I personally feel like them doing mid-season stuff is super impactful, and it actually like gives the players so much more faith in Blizzard. But whenever we have these situations where they don't really do anything until the next patch comes out, it feels super bad.
Well, they also did. I mean, they did this at the beginning of Dragonflight. Like the first 2 seasons specifically, they were.
I'm gonna say 2, but first season specifically. I remember second one.
They were buffing and nerfing. Yeah, well, Mythic Plus dungeon changes. Yeah, season 1 was on a tier of its own, but like tuning and balance changes for the first all the way through the first 2 seasons were like constant.
Yeah.
And it's as tuned as well as it has. A God Comp is its own thing, but like the whole expansion as tuned as it's ever been. But maybe the dungeon it does, and then like they fell off on tuning too. Like there was a point where it was like, okay, we're working on the War Within. It was very, very, very obvious if you were playing the game and paying attention to notes, like when they made that choice, because like it was just constant updates to nothing, absolutely nothing, right? Which I mean that's an expansion cycle, but yeah, they did fall off in season 1 from season 2 for dungeons. You could definitely tell.
Yeah, although again, season 4 did come with like a big fixing half the dungeons by a lot, so. I don't know. It's we know it's possible, right? It's just I hope it is a priority for them, and I hope it's something where it would be smart for it to be a priority for them. I hope it helps enough other people and not just us have a better time with these dungeons, because I always worry with stuff like Halls of Infusion last boss going from time based to percent based. Like, how many people is this going to make the dungeon better for? Because for me, it made that dungeon go from like a 3 to at least a 7 just instantly. Like that change just gave that dungeon such a huge spike. But for a lot of other people, if you're not like actually doing, keys in there, if you're just going in there and doing it on M0, I bet it doesn't really matter. So I don't know.
Well, the M0s now are actually kind of challenging, so I think it will probably matter to those
and
people.
M0s are so much, and I again just
Love
shout
that.
that change again. Shout out that change. The Mythic Zero thing. It sounded like kind of like a quality of life like update, like a visual change almost. Like people will just get it more. There's less number bloat, whatever. No, it's like a functional, great change. Yeah.
And hard mode Dawn of the Infinite as well. Like you can do hard mode Dawn of the Infinite right now, and you can get hero track gear. And it's like effectively fighting plus 10 level bosses and trash, untimed. Like it's great. It's incredible. It's
kind of sad there won't be
on the last boss.
It's sad there won't be anything like that in season 1 of the next expansion.
Dude, hold on,
right?
wait. Did I say this in the last podcast?
Yes.
I've been saying this to my chat.
What's up?
I was gonna say, like, what if they just had hard modes every season? Like, wouldn't that be cool as hell?
It would be
like,
sick.
just imagine having a Rookery. It could become hard mode, and then if you do
like
hard
one
mode
dungeon?
Rookery, or maybe just like multiple dungeons for that season. And if you do the hard mode version, obviously there's gonna be no timer. It gives you better rewards.
This is a good cook.
And each boss is just like a little bit extra, right? So I don't know too much about these new dungeons, so I'm just gonna use like an old dungeon for example. Like, what if you do Ruby life pools, and the first boss, every time she spawns the hail bombs now last forever, and maybe it spawns like 10 of them instead of only 5 of them. So it's like doing mythic mode of these dungeons. So not only are you doing like a unique or harder version of the boss, but you're also getting much bigger rewards. And if you do it deathless, you get even better loot on the last boss, which is what Dawn of the Infinite is right now. Like that's a really fun challenge too, because I know a lot of people have been attempting deathless hard mode in Dawn of the Infinite, and it's actually not easy, but it's super rewarding.
Yeah,
this is such a good idea. I'm gonna steal it and tweet it, and by the time this comes out, people will already have liked my tweet before they'll know that I totally stole your idea. That's gonna be insane.
Dude, it's like such good content for the game too. Like it's something that's a little bit different from M+, and it's different from rating, but it's like a little bit of combination of both, and there's no stress of the timer. It's free content.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think untimed content having like some overlap with the regular difficulty, right? Like letting you either do a plus 10 or hard mode for, difficult content, timed or untimed, whichever one's more fun for you is great. If anything, the Dawn of the Infinite one is like a little weird because there's so many super BIS Dawn of the Infinite items that you can't get from regular M+, but that would go away if it was just like Rookery M+ and Rookery hard mode were available. You get hard hero track Rookery gear out of either one. Pick your poison, right? Like that would be insane. That would be such a good thing, I think, for so many dungeon runners that don't like the timer or don't like the affixes, like we talked about at the start of this episode. The affixes, being gone from keys are also just a huge benefit for a lot of folks. So that's something you can get from those hard mode runs, right? It's just like a kind of like a classic hard dungeon, right? Or like what we used to, what our memories are of what classic hard dungeons were. Of course, now having actually replayed them, they were super easy.
Okay, it's a funny story. So you say it's super easy, but Growl was trying Cataclysm, right? Yeah, him and Twix hopped on. They boosted a character. They queued up. They got the Oculus, I think. And they were doing Heroic Plus, and they got absolutely farmed. The tank went into the first pull. He got frostbolted by like the mobs 5 times or whatever, instantly died. Everyone else dies. They go in again. Growl rips aggro. He pops wings, and then he like instinctively presses bubble, right? He's like, oh, I got aggro on all the guys. They were all casting frostbolts on me. I press bubble. But it turns out that pressing wings back then gives you forbearance. So he couldn't actually bubble, and he instantly dies, and they wipe again. And they actually wiped like 3-4 times until the tank or one of them got fed up, and he was like, did you guys just newly boost characters? But obviously, Growl wasn't going to say yes because he was going to get blacklisted by the entire classic Cata community. So he just says something along the lines of, nah, I've been playing since MOP, which kind of doesn't really make sense because they were playing Cata Classic. But yeah, the guy left and he was like, MOP this, and it ain't that easy, man.
That's good.
There's some challenge there.
Let's get to our Patreon question this week, which comes from Ragondo and says, how do you feel about Blizzard shifting much of the endgame gameplay towards creating alts? It's no secret that alting in Dragonflight has been much better than in previous expansions. Part of what makes it easier is what the endgame goals are in Dragonflight. In Legion, you had artifact weapons, legendaries. In BFA, you had Azerite essences and corruption. Shadowlands had Torghast legendaries, Covenant soulbinds. There's a stark difference in the barrier to endgame as the goals are much easier to attain. Embellishments and tier sets are easy to obtain just weeks into a patch. Getting those as well as high item level clears 90% of your character's total progression. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, as I enjoy alts, but this has come at a cost to those who enjoy only playing one character and accomplishing deep endgame goals that aren't Hall of Fame, M+ title, and Gladiator. Legion felt amazing, as I felt my main character getting stronger week by week for a very long time. Now in Dragonflight, it feels like Diablo 3, where your progression is so front-loaded and your power grind becomes scrapping any tiny fraction of a gain. The end result is me raid logging for my mythic raid weeks into a patch. War Within is leaning even harder into alting, and I think their philosophy is really shifting towards an alt-centric endgame, where you can 90% one character fast and then just go to the next. In Dragonflight Season 2, this was amazing with the upgrade system, but in Season 3, I felt zero motivation to do the same loop over again. Items at their core are just secondary stats that you can't feel, and a spec's gameplay isn't going to radically shift between patches barring a rework. So I guess, what do we think about that? Do we agree or disagree with the premise, and then with it being a good thing? Are there ways they could mitigate this, the downsides here?
So I kind of understand what this person's getting at. Like, I actually was like listening to Zaryu once. He just had a stream on and he was doing some classic stuff. It seems like a pretty popular classic Andy take where back in my day, people used to like specialize in their class. Like, everyone as their spec, right? Or class. Like you had, Sea-Doo, he's the Resto Shaman guy. Rekfo, the rogue guy. And nowadays, everyone's just kind of alting. So I can kind of understand where their sentiment is. Me personally, I prefer playing my alts, but some people definitely identify stronger with their main character, and they want to feel that progression on their main character. In fact, even people like THD, they go out of their ways and make 5 Warlocks and have a great time on all 5 Warlocks.
I do think all of us have kind of identified the your main character is done gearing in 3 weeks thing as a problem as well, right? Like that. Yeah, to some obviously that is
That's not quite true
hyperbolic,
now.
but
Yeah.
it is it was a problem I think in season 2 especially, but even in season 3, right? Like your main character does the power curve of a character has become very front loaded in a patch, and I think it's possible to dial that back without making it tougher for alts down the line. Even I don't think you have to make things alt unfriendly to make them more main friendly if you're willing to leverage the idea that like people make alts later in the patch. Characters later in a patch should have an easier path to gearing than early in the patch.
Oh yeah.
But Blizzard seems pretty reluctant to like do that by default. It seems like something where they're kind of like once every few patches they can be sort of bullied into doing it by like by doing a hotfix of some kind. But it's pretty rare that they'll actually just have a system where it's like, okay, yeah, alts do this faster. Like the thing they like doing is they like a cap that increases weekly that your alts can catch up to in theory, but they don't like making it so that your alts get more crests per week than your mains do, or get more crests per dungeon per boss than your mains do, which I think would be a really good way to let them have a longer grind for mains at the start of a patch and then still have that accelerate for both mains and alts towards the end of a patch.
I think if they removed, or not removed, sorry, if they did what you said, where they like kind of dial it back a bit at the beginning of the patch, I think they could add that power back to how good the weekly resets feel for longer. Like they're still pretty good right now, where it's like, oh, you're alternating between like a spark or a like a crafted item from the spark or a catalyst charge, right? And like you feel that power for a while, plus you're getting upgrades, but like you do kind of get all your items, and then what your weekly progression isn't necessarily for a lot of people getting new items. It's making those items bigger.
Yeah.
And that's different. Like that's not the same feeling, I think that's kind of interesting. I think this could just all be solved in the War Within 2, and we just don't know about it yet. Like they've announced Warbound stuff, but like that philosophy change and really digging deep into that could be a lot. You could get Warbound, you could have a cap for crests during your week, and then you might have Warbound crests that you can send to your alts, and you're literally earning them at the same time if you're still playing the game or something like that. Like with them making, and I know this post was more about like the actual end game as alts, but I think for people who want to play alts now, they should have a relatively easier time doing that in the War Within, and I think there's a lot of things they could change in the game to facilitate that have been even since the philosophy change at the end of Shadowlands, middle of Shadowlands, but I think it could be better. So I'm kind of waiting. I don't want to dive too deep into this now because I think it's possible 2 or 3 podcasts from now we actually see their idea for this, because it probably is something they're going to attack pretty soon in alpha. So yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, for me, I mean, the only thing is I just don't like having to do the same thing on my alts. Like, if I've already done something once on my main character, I don't want to have to do it again on an alt, but that directly contradicts this.
Right, yeah.
In fact, I feel like if they actually released AP nowadays, as long as it's account-wide, it would probably be decently well received.
Ooh.
I mean, like, as long as, like,
that's
the
an
progression
entire
you
other
make.
can of worms.
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about. But I don't know. I feel like as long as, people are able to make their progress across any spec and character, it wouldn't be as problematic.
Cool. All right, I think that about does it for us for this week. We will be back next week with a new alpha build, probably some new hero talents, all that kind of stuff, all the usual things. And we're also working on workshopping some like Patreon ideas, Patreon content stuff. So if you're interested in hearing more of us,
we're having a lot of Patreon content come out soon, right?
Yeah, we're gonna have some Patreon content. We're working on some like drama discussion stuff idea, but also just answering a bunch of Patreon questions, specifically in Patreon only videos. So do check that out if you're interested in hearing more of us. But for now, that's going to be the end of our podcast for this week.
Dude, wait, hold on. Before we go, alpha updates, where the hell are our DK stuff? How the hell do we just keep getting mage updates, man?
It's normal, dude. It's normal. Mages, well, it is normal for them to do like a couple classes every couple weeks, right? Like some classes go a month and then they start getting done in June or whatever.
I was looking forward to the DK changes.
They got to make sure mage is perfect before they
That's
work
true,
on
yeah.
anything else. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
Mage has
pretty important.
only had a rework in patch 10.2, or 10.1, which was 10.1.5. That was a long time ago, right? So we got to rework Mages again before we get to Hunter or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe give him like more mass.
Oh, there's a
barrier type
bunch of
stuff.
classes before Hunter, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course. All right. On that note,
Yep.
see you guys next week. Poddy
Yep, Poddy
later.
farewell.
Yeah.
Yep, Poddy farewell, everybody.